Hi there, everyone. Welcome back to another segment of The Mind Speaks. I'm Kalyong, and that's Dr. Joel from
Hello.
The Mind. And I think today we're here to talk about an interesting topic. I think something that's at the back of everyone's mind, but something that they don't simply talk about during lunch, dinner with their friends, family, partners. And it's something called self-sabotaging, right? I think people have heard about this for a while now, seen it happen, but what really is self-sabotaging?
Right. So self-sabotaging is a good topic because I think a lot of us do it. Not many people are aware that they're doing it, right? So I think with self-sabotaging, basically, if you want to look at it, it's any kind of behaviors that you do when you're trying to avoid something important, right? So studying for an exam, for example, going for a big interview, breaking up with someone, So those are things that are ripe situations like for some of the self-sabotage because they don't want to engage with it. So overarchingly, that's what self-sabotage is like. It stops you from or prevents you from doing something that you're afraid of, basically.
I think it's interesting that you talk about this kind of scenarios, right? Going for exams, relationships, and things like that. It ultimately feels like if you're scared of doing something, then people would tend to avoid doing it. People tend to, say, look, I'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'll do it the day after.
That's right.
Or I'll even not attempt it until somebody does it and I will follow suit, right? What are some other examples that could be seen, right, in everyday life situations?
So what you described just now was like procrastinating, basically, right? So when we want to avoid a behavior, we don't engage in it, we don't do it, right? When we put off as long as possible. So those of you guys, students who have done this before, right? I want to study for exam or I want to do assignment. Instead of doing that, we realize, oh, my table very cluttered, so I'm going to clear out my table. Or, oh, I don't have dinner, so I'm going to cook a 5-course meal. Whatever it is that is not going to that is going to stop me from doing what I need to do, that's what I'll do, right? So even if something like cleaning the toilet, it's not a nice thing to do, right? But yet it's still going to be more appealing than studying for exam, right? So that's one example of it. Other things could be also quite self-destructive, right? So for example, if I have a big interview to go for the next day and I'm, really, really afraid about it and I'm scared about it, I'm pissing bullets about it, right? The night before, I might go drinking, right? I might go drink so that I can forget about it and things like that. But in doing so, right, I self-sabotage because now I've done a behavior where I've coped in the short term. That means I don't feel afraid now, I don't feel scared now. But in the long run, it's going to sabotage me the next morning because I won't be able to go for the interview, right? Now, that might seem weird, right? Why would you self-sabotage that way? How does that help you? And the reason why it helps you, I think, is because by doing so, by drinking the night before, it means that you technically didn't fail the interview. If you fail the interview, technically what happens is that you made a bad choice. You went to drink with your friends, right? So it's the choice that's the problem, not you is the problem, right? So that's another way people can self-sabotage as well, right? Engaging in behaviors where you are absolved of blame, basically.
Right. I think it sounds like choice really matters, right?
Yeah, definitely. So it's what you decide to do, basically. Because, all of us have fear. We're all afraid of things, right? But at the end of the day, what is it that you are trying, or how are you trying to overcome that fear, right? You can either, it's fight or flight, basically. Fight means you fight that fear, you try and resolve it or get rid of it. Flight means you run away, right? And with self-sabotaging behaviors, more often than not, it's run away, and that's what you're choosing to do, basically.
Right. So based on examples that you have given, I think at any point in time, any one of us would have done this, went through those behaviors, potentially could still be doing it.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
But what essentially does it do to you? And like how some people say, look, I'm going to study extra for my exam, like the example you gave, right? Some people are going to study extra for my exam just to make sure that I am going to ace it, right? But then again, after studying that, a million thoughts go through their head.
Yep.
When they're actually in the exam hall, they'll be second guessing their answers. What happens, right, in these situations? It's not like this person is running away. It's not like this person is not doing enough. It seems like they are trying to prepare themselves as best as they can, but yet still have those, second thoughts, doubts, whilst they are going through the exam, or even life, right, in general.
Yeah, I think that really depends, right? So on the one hand, it could be self-sabotaging, right? Because you over prepare for something to a point where it almost like overwhelms you, right? So it's sabotaging in that sense, right? You over prepare for something. And I think when you over prepare for something, more often than not, you are filled with nerves lah, in that sense, right? So like for example, if I'm giving a speech and I print out my speech the night before and I keep reading it again and again and again to over prepare for it. Because I over prepare, that means I have more time to worry, and the more time I have to catastrophize and think about worst case scenarios, like I might miss out a few words here and there, I might read the wrong page, my pants could bust a hole, for example, or whatever it is, right? And I think it fills your mind with so much anxiety, then it becomes self-sabotaging in that sense, right? It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing, right? On the other hand, I also can imagine that for someone who is has so much thoughts going through their head, that when they are engaged in their behavior, it's like you're trying to over prepare, right? So I'm going to account for all these different scenarios, all these different questions that are going to come up for the exam, all these different answers or questions that people are going to ask me, for example, right? So much so that instead of fulfilling me with calmness and serenity, because I know how to overcome these situations, I'm just bogged down by just panic and uncertainty and holy crap, what's going on? What am I going to do now, right? Because there's just so many bad things that could happen in that sense, right? So I think that's an example, very good example of self-sabotaging or how bad it can be in the long run.
You're right. And I think this is a very good point to look at for now. A lot of people look at it as being fully prepared, right? And then obviously we have this situation that you spoke about, overly prepared, catastrophizing and things that come after that, right? So how do you draw the line, or where do you draw the line on what is efficiently or effectively prepared versus overcompensating?
That's a good question, and I don't think there's an answer to that, right? Because I think every one of us is different. Every one of us has a different threshold on what prepared enough or over prepared was going to be like, right? At the end of the day, a good rule of thumb, I suppose, to delineate between self-sabotaging and preparing, I think, is when you've done enough that you know what you need to do, right? That's a good place to stop, right? And I know that sounds vague, but what I'm trying to say is this, right? Let's say you're preparing for an exam, right? And you know that it covers chapters 5 to 10, let's say, for example. You've done your reading, you've done your practice set papers from chapters 5 to 10, and you know the material. Stop, right? And the reason why I say stop is because once you know the material, anything above and beyond that you do, you're second guessing, you're trying to hypothesize, you're trying to assume what is going to come out in that sense. I think that once we start doing that, once we start planning for different situations which may or may not come true, I think that's when self-sabotaging kicks in, because then you are going to put yourself in a situation where you're going to shoot yourself in the foot because you're over-preparing for it. Same goes for things like breaking up romantic relationships as well. If you know you're going to want to date someone, right? Go date someone, right? Don't think about what if it works out and then we have to get married and then we're going to have kids and then we're going to have live together for the rest of another 30, 40 years. I don't know about you, but for a lot of people that scares the bejeebers out of them, basically, right? A date is a date is a date. It doesn't have to be the rest of your life, right? And you can also go the other way around as well, right? Going for a date means going for a date. You don't have to think about how he or she might not like you, might not like the place that you guys are going, might say that, dude, you're damn weird, I don't want to see you anymore, for example, right? Again, it's self-sabotaging in that sense because you are setting yourself up for failure, basically, right? So I think prepare as much as you need to and then stop. Plan for something to do, go on a date for whatever it is, and then stop. And then let it happen, basically. Don't spend so much time planning ahead of time or planning into the future that it's going to be detrimental to you, basically.
So it sounds like being in the present would probably help.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think being in the present also means that you get to identify the root causes of the procrastination or the self-sabotaging, basically, right? Being present means that you can acknowledge, okay, this is what I'm afraid of, this is what I need to tackle, basically.
Right. So obviously now with this knowledge, right, I think a lot of people would have been in these situations where they self-sabotage and then they have detrimental results, right? But having done that, I'm sure people keep going through that cycle again and again and again, right?
Yep.
Why do people do that, right? Knowing that, by having this pattern repeating itself, it's not fun, definitely it's not fun, but why?
I think the reason why is because in a weird kind of way, self-sabotaging is actually a means for you to cope with an uncomfortable situation, right? So let's use the classic example, studying for an exam or doing an assignment. Yeah? Inherently, it's not a fun thing to do, right? Because if I have an exam to sit for, I have to work hard and I may or may not fail. If I do an assignment, again, I have to work hard and it may or may not come out right or well, basically. Might not do well, right? And I think because of the uncertainty, and human beings, we just really don't like uncertainty. We just don't like things that we're not sure of, right? It means that heightens that fear, the anxiety that we have, right? So by self-sabotaging, by doing procrastinating behaviors, for example, going out drinking the night before your exam and whatever it is that you do, in a weird kind of way, it helps because it pushes away that fear. We avoid it, we step away from that fear. And by doing so, we feel better in the short term, right? And for that hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, we feel good. The next day, we're screwed, basically. Like when an exam comes or assignments due, then we're in trouble. That in the long run, it's going to be bad for us, right? Now, rationally speaking, anyone can tell you that, hey, long term is bad for you, don't do it, right? It makes sense, right?
Yep.
But because we are still so animalistic in nature, like as human beings, right? We tend to go for the quick fixes, and to do the things that makes us feel good right now. So that's why I think people keep self-sabotaging again and again and again, because it's easier, right? The better thing to do would be to sit down and tackle the underlying problem, right? If you have exam, you have exam ready, why study 24 hours before, right? Study, 24 days before, that kind of thing, right?
Okay, that's a very good example, right, of why people still keep doing it.
Yeah.
Right. And I think one thing to think about, right, is obviously a lot of people might not know that they're self-sabotaging, and now that they potentially do, right, how would they look at addressing it, right? You mentioned just now tackling the problem.
Yeah.
But I think tackling that problem is itself a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
Right? If they would have identified it as a problem, they would have tackled it. Right? Some could even see it, identify it, but don't know how to tackle it.
Yeah.
Right. So, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think by and large, what you described is the steps you need to overcome self-sabotage, right? So, first one is identifying when you are doing it, when you're self-sabotaging, right? All of us, when we self-sabotage, we have patterns on, right? We have things that we do, right? Some clean toilets, some bake cakes, some go drinking, some go partying, some go play futsal, whatever. Right? All of us have a habit, I guess you want to call it that, or something habitual that we do, basically, right? So that's the first one, identifying triggers. Then the next step is, once you realize you're doing it, ask yourself, hey, what's up? What's going on? What am I afraid of? What am I avoiding, basically, right? And through that conversation with yourself, you identify what your triggers are, basically, what's initiating all this anxiety, basically. And again, like you rightly said, ideally, once we can identify the problems, we can then go and fix it, right? So if it's exam, worry about failing, study longer, study for a longer period. If you are afraid of a relationship, then try it out and see why worry about it yet, right? Before it happens. Or if you're going to break up with someone, then it's going to feel shitty, but it needs to be done. Then go ahead and do it, right? But I get where you're coming from. It's not easy to tackle these kind of things, right? Like you said, if it was easy, I would have fixed it a long time ago already, right?
Yep.
One work around this is to get help, right? So that means tell someone about it, your BFF, your significant other, a family member, for example. Tell them what's going on. I think sometimes when we leave all these problems in our heads, right, these things we're afraid of or we're anxious about, it starts growing. It's like a pressure cooker. It grows. And because our minds are such wonderful things, right, we think about a million different scenarios in a snap for a second. Like if I ask you, hey, dude, what are you going to have for lunch later? I'm pretty sure things like KFC, McDonald's, Safan, Mama all popped in the head because you're trying to search for an answer, right? Same goes if I'm thinking, will I pass an exam? My mind immediately goes into overdrive and thinks I might fail, I might not have a job, I'm going to be a bum, I'm going to be a failure in life, for example. All these different scenarios pop up in the head very quickly. So when you keep it in your head, it grows and grows and grows. This anxiety grows, right? But when you're able to talk to someone about it, it's like a release valve, basically, right? You're making it concrete. The problem here is whether I will pass or fail my exam. That's it. It doesn't go anywhere more than that. So I think that's one of the benefits of talking to someone. We constrain the problem a little bit, right? And they also give you some good advice, right? Maybe they've done things that are helpful for them or given you ideas that you've not considered before, right? So that's definitely one thing that you can try. The other one would be therapy, lor, right? I think working with a therapist would be an option, definitely, or a counselor, because I think at the end of the day, they are going to be able to help you understand the nature of the problem. And sometimes these problems are quite deep rooted, right? I can also imagine a situation where someone is afraid of the exams because they have this underlying fear of being completely inadequate or completely useless, for example, right? So anything and everything they do, also they're super hyper vigilant. They will be careful about it, and that's not something you want to tackle yourself. So maybe that's when you want to see a therapist and get some help in that regard.
Well, I think those are very good advice, right, on how to address and potentially overcome some of the self-sabotaging behaviors, right? And I think what we are looking at now is this. Let's assume you have just one or two sentences of a take-home message for the viewers, right? What would you like to tell them about self-sabotaging and the topic?
I think remember the first one I think is to be kind to yourself, right? We don't self-sabotage for fun, right? So we self-sabotage because we are afraid of something, we're scared of something, we're nervous about something, right? So be kind to yourself in the sense that if you notice that you're self-sabotaging, don't beat yourself up over it. Just say, okay, cool, I am self-sabotaging. That's first step, right? Identify it, right? Next one is once you identify it, okay, why am I self-sabotaging, right? So I think it's always helpful to understand where it's coming from. That's the second one. Identify why you're nervous or why you're anxious that you're self-sabotaging, so that you can do number 3, where it's basically tackling head on, basically, right? If it's anxiety, tackle the anxiety. If it's fear, tackle that fear. If it's because you are doing something you don't like, tackle that, right? So it's more targeted. And I think doing so would then hopefully, ideally, eliminate that self-sabotaging because you're addressing the main problem. And the last step I think is just to get help, right? Because I think sometimes we just cannot do everything on our own. Sometimes we just need a helping hand.
All right. Thank you very much for the sharing, and I think
Sounds
hopefully
good.
the viewers get to take something home, learn something about themselves, and see you next time.
All right, sounds good.